Well, Patty, obviously this episode is a perfect episode to talk about our sponsor, Valor Paytech, right?
Yes,
because we're talking
it is.
about cash discounting. So,
yes, it is.
Valor has just simply become the industry standard for cash discounting. If you're providing terminals, whether it's a smart terminal, standalone terminal, or an omni-channel virtual terminal,
Right.
any of those three, if you're doing cash discounting, this is the terminal. This is the solution.
This is what you want to do. Yes.
This is it, right?
No
So,
question.
if you want to learn more about Valor, maybe there's some of you out there that have been living in a cave for the last couple of years, and maybe you didn't realize that Valor is like the terminal you want to go with. If that's the case, go to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, and check it out. And then, Patty, tell us about the episode today and what we have in store for our listeners.
Well, we have this great interview with Donnie Troy, who to me is like, the epitome of a successful agent. I mean, he's a ISO, he has his own ISO brand, as we know, but he talks about how he found his way into cash discounting and what it's doing for him. And it's amazing. I mean, just over the last few months, how many clients he's signed up. I think everybody's going to get a lot out of that. And then, James, you follow on with a great question from the field.
Yeah. So if you all want to hear me make a lot of enemies in the processing industry, listen to my questions from the field today. But yeah, I just talk about this kind of ridiculous situation we find ourselves in where a lot of the large acquirers that are moving the money don't support cash discounting and are actually against it. And I talk about what we as an industry should do about that. And then Patty, tell us about the insiders.
Well, we have some really interesting data points on processing volume and revenue potential. I'll just put it at that. Stick around, listen to my insiders report. You may come away with some interesting insights. So, what do you say, James? You ready to hit the play button?
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
All right, everybody. We are here today with my good friend Donnie Troy. Donnie is the owner of OneQuest Payments. He is the individual member ISO. So, how's it going down there, Donnie?
It's going great, James. Glad to be on here today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So every once in a while, I reach out to Donnie, and he's a reluctant participant in the podcast, right, Donnie? So just to be honest, right? So Donnie is not the executive at the at the big company. He's feet on the street. He's got referrals. He's building a local ISO. But I have these topics that come to mind every once in a while, and I'm like, you know what? I don't want to interview the president of FIS to talk about this. I need to talk to somebody that's actually doing it. And so, today Donnie and I and Patty are going to talk about this journey that a lot of salespeople have been on, that a lot of industry experience, and, they were against cash discounting. And then just in the last kind of 6-8 months, it seems like a lot of them now are jumping on board for a lot of different reasons that we're going to discuss. But before we dive into that, Donnie, it's been a while since you were on, so maybe you could give us a little background. Yeah. Tell us how you got into the industry and kind of where you're at today.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I got introduced to the industry in 2010. I was 24 years old, and I was in the in-between stage of giving up my dream of playing golf and trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life.
Yeah.
And I was working weddings at a golf course, and I came across a guy who owned a small ISO, and I could tell he was financially successful, and that intrigued me. And, he was actually very helpful. I spent a lot of time with him learning the business. But at the end of the day, I just wasn't comfortable. I wasn't feeling like there was enough transparency with his ISO and how it would all work with the residuals and, being able to see what the merchants were processing. And so then I just kind of looked at the internet and tried to find, some other options. And I came across you, James. And awesome. I still remember my first phone call with you, talking to you about the industry, and you helped me get started at a bigger ISO. And I spent a few years there, and that was those 2 or 3 years. I learned so much about the industry, and I always had you as a helpful hand as well to work some deals, and you were always available to answer questions. So that was the beginning of how it all got started. After 2 or 3 years, I looked at some other options in the industry, and I found a smaller group that the residual split was more generous. There wasn't upfront bonuses or free equipment. They weren't going to pay my early termination fees, but I was in it for the residual at that point, and I had enough money. I had enough money to invest in new deals, and so I got started with them. And today, last couple of years, I've been balancing about 170 merchants. Average residuals around $150 per merchant. So, the money's very good, but at the same time, I knew that, I could make more ground in this industry. I knew I had more potential.
Yeah.
And so about 3 or 4 months ago, I sat down with my wife and just told her I was going to make another big push and there'll be some sacrifices. But, I put a blank piece of paper up on our kitchen magnet display and said, I'm going to fill this page up with new clients, and put one column for cash discounting and one for traditional, and kind of been just working that. So
I love it.
That's cool. That's great.
yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love especially the conversation with the wife. Those are always good conversations. I've had many of those over the years. Right. It's like,
exactly. Yeah.
But I think I love that you brought that up, Donnie, and, we won't dive into that too much, but, to me, I feel like a lot of people in the industry get, my friend Rich Norton, who's a top rep in the industry, he calls it residualitis. They get residual and then they just disappear.
Exactly.
Right.
And generally I talk to them after a few years and they're actually not super happy the way you would think they would be, because they're like, what am I doing? So I think it's really important to have a why and to have a reason to push forward. So, okay. So let's talk about cash discounting here, Donnie. So let's back up here.
Yeah.
So let's go back maybe 2 years. I'm pretty sure at that point you weren't selling cash discounting, right?
I was not, no.
Okay.
In fact, that's right around when we interviewed Donnie last, I think. It was like 2 or 3 years ago.
All right. There you go. So at that time, Donnie, talk to me about cash discounting a little bit, and as far as your perception at that time. Obviously, you knew it existed, but you weren't selling it. Why weren't you, and what was kind of your perception at that time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was definitely aware of cash discounting. I think that I just wasn't certain enough on the program that it was the best decision for my merchants.
Yep.
So it was really just a confidence in that regard. It was kind of like terminal leases on like a basic terminal. Obviously they're profitable. Cash discounting was so profitable, I knew it. And I think I kind of just related like those, even though they're totally different. So I just wasn't sure that it was the right thing for my merchants. It just took me a little time to realize, that is a great deal. So that's kind of,
and then
how I felt about it.
Go ahead,
if I could just interject real quick, because we kind of looked at it at that 2-year time frame, and we talk a lot about how hard the COVID pandemic has been on merchants, especially restaurants and stuff. Did that have an impact on your decision?
Yes, and also just I could feel the wave of it coming on, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but I had some merchants reach out to me about it. So it's just, I think the timing right now is pretty good for it. And it just took a little bit more belief to see how it works.
Sure, you had to you had to grasp onto it and realize that this is something I can run with. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and then another aspect too, the ISO I'm with, they're opening up to it now, but they weren't so open to it. And I think that part of me was like, well, if I work so hard and do this, what if they shut down these accounts?
Right.
Is it really here to stay? I wanted to make sure that it was here to stay for the long term.
Sure.
Yeah, I love it. One other thing I wanted you to touch on that we had talked about previously in our conversation is technology. So maybe even, going back 6 months or a year ago, what were your, did that have any impact as well on your decision of like, hey, I don't want to do cash discounting yet because it's like, it doesn't integrate with anything. The terminals are terrible for it. Like at that point in time, let's face it, cash discounting technology sucked. Right. So what did that have any impact as well, Donnie?
It definitely did. The technology that was available, there was also a lot of other technologies that people talked about that I didn't really feel like I had my hands on it, for cash discounting. But I think at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple setup, and I could have gotten it done back then. I have a lot of PAX S80 terminals out there.
Right.
They can do it. Those have actually changed. Though the newer versions of those, they're only allowing for surcharging now. And so, as this has progressed, I've found another provider for terminals and technology, and I feel like I'm in a good position now.
Yeah, love it. Okay, all right. So then let's start to transition here. So you got to a point where something happened where you realized, wait a minute, let's take another look at this. You told me about, I think, even one specific merchant that had reached out. So tell us a little bit about that experience. Maybe that merchant that reached out, or some others there. So
I remember you mentioning that. Sure.
So, I have to admit, actually, I actually signed 2 cash discount accounts back in 2019. One was a merchant that just reached out to me and they wanted to do it. And then the other was a nail salon that I was just prospecting, and she was having some equipment issues. She wasn't getting the support, and she's like, just set me up like this, and I'd like to move forward. And I don't know why that didn't like speed up my adoption of this program, because I still have those clients. They're still very successful.
Right.
But recently, so it's a little bit of it was a crazy week. So I had an automotive shop reach out. They had been prospected regarding the program, so they wanted more information, and they instantly signed up for it. And then I had a nail salon that it's a really nice nail salon, and she reached out to me, and so I set her up. And as this is going on, I had two new prospects that this is just 3 months ago. I had two new prospects that I was working on. One was it was like a independent UPS store, like a shipping center.
Right.
And the other was a nail salon. And as I was getting closer with these deals, I ended up finding out that this shipping store was already doing cash discounting. And I had no idea, because they had no signage up. And I had actually used their services and didn't even notice the cash adjustment on the receipt.
Right.
So that was like a very easy sell. What was going on was he had two different terminals, two different merchant ID numbers, and like two different rates. So he was just like, I just need to clean him up, and we got him running. And then he goes to me, you need to talk to my sister. She owns a dry cleaners, and the dry cleaner was like 30 minutes away. It was his sister. So I called her up, and she got her going the next day. So all within a week, I had 4 of these accounts running, and they were very successful. I waited a week, no calls, no one wanted to come back to traditional processing. And that's kind of where I was like, woke up and I was like, this is a huge opportunity. So, I got my terminal options in place, got some marketing materials, cleaned up the signage, and my approach. And, the last 3 months have been crazy, just converting clients.
So it's pretty much you got into it like in 2021. I mean, you said your first client you boarded like what in 2019, but in terms of when you really began offering cash discounting, would you say that was like last year?
Just like 3 months ago. I mean, the ones in 2019 were, it was just like a fluke. I kind of didn't give it much attention. I mean, I knew the profit was big on it, but I wasn't sold on it just yet to have the confidence, like I said, to go to my current client base. I mean, my clients trust me. They trust my input. And so I didn't have the confidence and certainty in it yet. So yeah, it was really just 3 months ago that this kind of started happening, and I saw the success of it. I saw that it was really helping these small businesses. And so that's when I decided to, go after my current client list, and start educating them on the program.
So in terms of, the impact on your portfolio, it's pretty new. So, but I mean, I get the sense that you're going to go out and really be going great guns on this going forward. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. I mean, I haven't seen the financial adjustment yet to my residual, but I've done some calculations. I mean, in the last 3 months, I have signed up 25 cash discounting accounts.
Wow.
17 of them were current clients already, and 8 were brand new. And these are some bigger clients. So, I mean, just in the 25, my residual is going to increase by $8,000 to $10,000 a month just on those accounts. And I mean, that's never, I mean, that's crazy to me.
Oh yeah.
But I'm seeing the success that it's having for the business owner, which is really important to me.
Right. Sure.
And so, yeah, I'm definitely very excited. And I just had an automotive shop call me today. I met with him 2 days ago. So what I've been doing with all my clients, he's a current client, and he just called me and said, come by, let's get this started. So, I mean, it's happening quick.
What about the impact on the merchants? Have you seen and your processing volumes? Have you seen any change in that? Maybe customers going to cash because they don't want to pay the extra charge.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of my merchants thought that they were going to start getting checks and more cash, and I think that just from the reading I've done in the industry, I kind of knew that wouldn't be the case. Consumer habits don't really change that much. And so I would say, the volume, if anything, it's gone up. I mean, that's what this program does, is it increases the volume. So yeah.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah. It is interesting. Like I was just doing an event recently, and I had a group of like 30 newer people to the industry. And I was talking to them, and I said, what do you think happens to processing volume when you implement this program? And they all said, well, it probably drops some.
Right.
And I said, no, it actually goes up. And they're like,
Right.
what? What do you mean? How's
But
it go up?
intuitively, you think it's going to go down, right? Because
Right.
I'm like, yeah, it goes up about 4% because
Right. Yeah.
everybody keeps using their card. Nothing really changes, but now they're paying a little bit more. So
Yeah.
it's
The
really
biggest
crazy.
feedback I've received is, my merchants are saying that their customers aren't even noticing the non-cash adjustment.
Right.
I mean, so they have the signage up, they have everything, but most people don't notice it.
Right.
So.
yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So here, let's get a little more specific here because I'm kind of curious for those that maybe, they've just gotten into cash discounting like you did, but they haven't gone after their existing book. So let's talk about that for a minute. When you're going back to your current clients, what's your approach here? I mean, are you just calling them and setting up an appointment and saying, hey, I need to talk to you about this? Or like, I'm just curious, are you like really pushing it? Like, how are you doing this with your existing clients?
Yeah, good question. I started with a spreadsheet. I exported my clients into an Excel spreadsheet. I highlighted the ones that, I thought would be really good potentials, storefronts, face-to-face transactions. And then I even looked at some of their rates and volume, and, the lower the rate, the higher the volume, the more profitability those accounts will be. And so, I've really just been reaching out. I'll drop in without them knowing too, but usually I'll reach out and say, hey, I have something I'd like to show you. Obviously they're receptive because I'm already their credit card agent.
Right.
So I go in and the reception's been really good. I mean, I'm surprised how good it's been, to be honest. A lot of people have signed up right on the spot. Some people, they want a couple of days to think about it. But like I just said, I had an automotive shop call me back. I'm not used to prospects calling me back.
calling you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that never
you have
happens.
to be, what I mean? You have to be interested in them and keep following up. And so the feedback's been really good. That's kind of been my approach for the last 3 months. And like I said, I've done 25 and, I'll probably do another 5 or 10 in the next week. It's happening quick.
Yeah. Now, what about though, when you're going out and prospecting for new business? I know a lot of it's probably referrals for you at this point, but when you have that first interaction with the merchant, is there kind of a qualification in your mind of okay, is this person going to be a good fit, or is it just go right off with cash discounting, or are you presenting options? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I walk into a business, I have a pretty good feel for what they're doing there. I can instantly see their credit card machine, what's going on. So, I'll know if it's a good cash discount customer. And I am leading with that for sure. Eliminate your credit card bill. If they're not open to a conversation about that, then they're probably not going to be open to talking about anything in regards to their credit card processing.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'm doing. I mean, if it's like a B2B merchant where they're doing a lot of payments over the phone or whatnot, I'm not going to lead with cash discount for that. But yeah, right now that's what I'm doing, leading with the cash discount program.
Cool, man. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, it's just really exciting, having this conversation. And this is a conversation I've had privately with 200 or 300 people over the last year. And it seems like every week there's another 3 or 4 agents that I talk to that are like, I've been watching your videos about this for 4 years. And, and I get it. Because like you said, and I believe it's so important to have that belief that it's got to be, you have to believe, I think it's even goes further. It's you have to believe it's the right thing for the merchant, but you even have to believe it's the right thing for the consumer.
And the right thing for you as a salesperson, right?
Well, that part's easy because you make way more money.
But I mean, sometimes there's sort of, I know when we first started talking about this, several years ago, I was sort of the naysayer going, nah, this isn't going to work. I can't, merchants agents have a tough enough time to sell the merchants. They're not going to get them to fight on this. And
But then Patty she was stuck on a podcast with me every week. So eventually,
eventually I became a convert.
I mean, to Patty's point though, you don't want to risk your client base by, putting a program that's not going to work. So,
right.
That's why I was a little reluctant. You wanted to make sure it works. And, it took seeing it just like signing my first credit card processing deal ever, just to see that it works. The money goes to their bank account.
The money comes in.
Yeah. So it's very similar to that.
Love it. Well, Donnie, can't thank you enough for just taking time out of your schedule. I know you got a lot going on right now, but I appreciate you taking time to share this with our audience. I really think it's going to help people. And so I just appreciate you taking the time to share your story and jump on with us as always.
Yeah, Johnny,
Awesome,
this has
James.
been really great. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Patty. I appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for having me today.
So Patty, of course, at the top of the episode, we talked about our sponsor, Valor Paytech, providing processor agnostic terminals, virtual terminals, smart terminals. And so it's really become, again, this kind of industry standard for cash discounting. But, one thing that's also so important is the supply chain issues.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been so many backlogs, right, because of the chips and
Yes.
terminals on order for months ahead of time.
Yep.
But Valor's been able to address that.
They haven't, I don't want to dive into too much detail. I don't want to kind of steal their thunder from, what's going on in their internal. But what I will say is they've been by far the most creative hardware provider in terms of finding chips, working with their suppliers, different suppliers to create their terminals. I mean, they have gone way above and beyond to secure their ability to provide terminals. Now, like everybody else, I mean, it's a struggle, every month they're working on it, and sometimes they can't fulfill a massive order or something until, a few weeks or whatever. But they've done an incredible job of keeping their supply up. And so if you are an ISO, you're selling cash discounting, especially, or really anything else for that matter, but especially if you're selling cash discounting, and you just need a good terminal provider, one that's going to be, consistent. Yep. Definitely check them out. Go to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR. Do us a favor, do Patty and I a favor. If you get value from our podcast, go there and fill that out. If you're not using Valor, fill that form out. They'll follow up and do a demo. I promise you're going to be blown away when you see what they have.
Yeah, I agree. So again, ccsalespro.com/VALOR.
And now, here is questions from the field with James Shepard.
Patty, today I want to talk about the biggest risk to ISOs and agents that are building cash discounting portfolios. Okay. And it's not regulation, and it's not the card brands. So I think there's a really serious practical risk that we have decided to turn a blind eye to, and I think it's gone on way too long.
Okay.
The risk is that almost every agent and ISO that is listening to this podcast is ultimately processing with a company, the company that's the acquirer that's actually moving the money.
Right.
Most of our listeners are processing with a company that is publicly and actively against cash discounting.
That's true.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
It is.
I'm talking, I'll name them. I mean, I'm talking about
they're making tons of money off of it.
Fiserv, TSYS. I mean, you go down the line, these companies, if you talk to their executives, if you reach out and ask them to make a public, their statement about it, they are against these programs. They believe these programs are not compliant at best, illegal at worst, and they're against them. That's insane. It is crazy that we are building portfolios on the backs of companies that are against it. And we've developed this idea that, well, that's okay because they're not bothering us about it. So they're willing to turn a blind eye behind the scenes. And
but for how long?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And we're kind of like, most of the ISOs I talk to, and they're like, well, I certainly don't want to let my processing company know what I'm doing. Are we nuts? Like, what are we doing?
It's kind of like the guys that, used to board cannabis shops and, put them in as cigarette shops or something like that and expect that nobody's ever going to catch up with them, right? I mean, you can flaunt the rules for only so long.
Right. So I have a couple of pieces of advice that maybe some in the industry might want to think about. Okay.
Okay.
Number one, please understand that there are acquirers, huge acquirers. There are several of them now who are publicly and actively supporting these programs.
Yes.
And I believe as an industry, we should reward them with our business.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to name any names because I don't do that kind of stuff, but if you want to know
research, you'll find it.
Exactly. Right. Go to ccsalespro.com and click on find a processor. I'll do a free call with you and talk to you about that. So I'm fine with that. But there are companies that are publicly supporting it. I talked to the president of a company yesterday that's the top 10 acquirers, and we were talking about this and his stand on it. And I was like congratulating him on there's not very many of you there. Right? Like what? But I mean, it's crazy to me that it's like, here I am talking to the president of I don't know, I think they do 50 billion a year, the company I was talking to yesterday, and huge company. And I'm thinking to myself, why am I not more publicly supporting at least this idea? Because it's crazy that when I talk to these executives at these other big companies and they're like, oh, eventually these programs are going to get shut down. And I'm thinking Really? Yeah. So
There's an awful lot of them out there too, James. You're
Yeah.
going to shut all those down?
right. And it's like, so here's my thought. Number one is there are companies out there that are supporting it. And I'm talking about, again, to be clear, some of you don't maybe even realize, because you're like a sub ISO.
Right.
Like, who is moving your money?
Mhm.
You need to know that.
Yes.
Is it First
Yes.
Data? Is it Vantiv? Is it TSYS? Is it WorldPay? Is it, whoever, like,
B of
who is-
A,
who's moving the money? Who is the acquirer?
right.
And then you need to find out, what do they believe about cash discounting? And if they believe it's non-compliant, if they believe it's illegal, if they believe it should be shut down,
then
you
you should
might
be warning
wanna
on them.
take a
Yeah.
second look here, right? And so, it's just so funny to me that as I talk to people in the industry, all everybody talks about is Visa going to shut it down? Is Visa going to shut it down? Is the legislature? It's like, they've had years. They're
Right.
not doing anything. But
Right.
the processor that you're working with might shut it down.
Yeah.
Many of them
Yeah.
have actually, there's 2 companies, I'm talking about top 5, that have actually shut it down for some period of time. They both ended up allowing it again.
Yeah, right.
But there's 2 that have actually, I'm talking about their ISOs are calling me frantic because they got a notice from their acquirer that said, you have 700 merchants that are doing this cash discount program, and in 30 days, they will not be allowed to do it. Like, that's happening. That has happened, right? Now, do I know that all these other companies, that they want to do that now? I don't know of any that are looking to do that, but I'm just saying, I think it is insane that we're giving them our business. So number one is, look for some processors, be aware, understand who's moving your money. And then finally, number 3, for those of you that have larger, wholesale ISOs, you're taking all the risk, you're doing all of this. Maybe it's time, especially as you have contract negotiations that are coming up. Why don't we all collectively start to put a little pressure on these companies and say, look, my wholesale ISO contract is up with you in 8 months, 12 months, 15 months. Just so you know, I will not be renewing that, and I will use my portability, and I'll be moving my book somewhere else if you're not going to support what I do.
Right.
But I believe that it's not, especially as a wholesale ISO, the idea that you're doing something that is blatant and flagrantly against the rules of the processor that you're in partnership with, and you're both willing to do this because they're willing to turn a blind eye and you're willing to hide it.
Yeah.
In what universe are we living in that we think that's a good idea?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Right. So it's time to put some pressure on and say, okay, everybody, like, what are you waiting for? You're waiting on Visa. What are they going to do? They haven't done anything. Like, it's time to call a spade and
Right.
say all the memos and all the threats and all this stuff. The bottom line is the Durbin Amendment and state laws are giving a lot of air cover to these programs. And
Right.
maybe it's time that we actually embrace that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's time that as an industry, we said, hey, if you want to work with the ISOs, then you're going to have to support the programs that we're presenting, and that now we have really good, compliance stuff on, and we have great
Right.
terminals, and we have great point of sale systems. Like, we have all this stuff, and it's like everybody just keeps wanting to kick the can. I was talking to somebody right before we recorded this podcast, Patty, and I was talking about this issue because this, person does huge cash discounting deals. And I said, one of the biggest issues we have is that because there's this culture in our industry right now where it's like, well, I've got to hide the cash discounting from the acquirer, and the acquirer is like, I don't want to know if you're doing it. Well, then what's happening is the acquirer, who has all the legal and compliance resources, is having zero involvement with the creation of these programs. And it's one reason so many of them are such a mess. And then they reach out to me, and it's like, I'm glad to help as a consultant, but at the same time, ultimately, I can only help you so far if no matter what I do, your acquirer is against what we're doing. That's a risk that I can't help you abate. I mean, that's a problem, So anyway,
Right.
number one is,
But it's a problem that they can negotiate.
absolutely they can. And
A
again,
solution
they're all terrified, Patty, because they don't
Right.
want to negotiate, because if they go back and they say, hey, we need to negotiate, then it's like, well, because you told us that you're doing this now, you can't do it anymore. That's what they're all afraid of. Everybody,
Wow. Yeah.
and it's like, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. So again, what I would say is, number one, know who is moving your money for your merchants. Number 2, look, again, go to ccsalesforce.com, click on find a processor. I will have a free conversation with you and talk to you about this. I can tell you the names of all the companies and who supports it, who doesn't. I'm done I'm done being on the sidelines with this because I think this is a serious risk to ISOs and agents. And I think it's ridiculous that these companies, they were making fun of me 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I forgive them for that. That's totally fine. But guess what?
Right.
They were wrong. And those of us in the industry that saw the program coming, we were right.
Yes.
It's time to call it what it is.
Right.
And it's, so, that's fine. That's all water under the bridge. But now it's not water under the bridge anymore. These companies are still against it. And they've got these ISOs that are my consulting clients that are people that are coming to me for advice. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to start telling people that that's a bad idea and that you should go to a company that supports it. So
I think that's excellent advice, James.
Yeah. So anyway, know who's moving your money. Do some research and find out companies that are supporting cash discounting. And number 3, if you're in a position to negotiate with these larger companies, let's as an industry start to put a little pressure on and say, what's your stance on cash discounting? And if you tell me your stance is you're okay with it as long as you don't know what's happening, then I'm going to go somewhere else.
That's not a good answer.
The stance needs to be, we support it. We're standing up to the car brands in favor of it. We're developing compliance solutions. We're providing resources and legal advice to our ISOs and agents to make sure that we are putting the programs out there with our full public support. If your acquirer isn't willing to say that, go to a different one. Yeah. That's my advice.
Thank you, James. That's great advice.
This is the Insider's Report with Patty Murphy.
James, I spend a lot of time poring over consulting reports, annual reports, investor meeting notes, things like that. Sure. Always looking for little tidbits of, that I can use in my news writing. And this week I came across a couple things I wanted to share with everybody. One was from Visa. The other was from McKinsey & Company, which is a pretty reputable global consulting firm.
I should say so.
Yeah. So Visa execs in late January had a call with analysts to discuss the company's latest quarterly earnings. And Visa's on a weird fiscal schedule. I mean, its Q1 ended, I think, January 30th or something like that, or January 25th. It's a very strange way to do it. But anyway, so it was their Q1 report. And their CEO, Al Kelly, painted, of course, a rosy picture of Visa's future, which includes increased volumes of traditional credit and debit, in addition to opportunities, like A2A, RTP, real-time payments, buy now, pay later, crypto. They're getting into all that stuff. So,
sure.
But here's what really stood out for me. He noted that based on research that they have, cash and checks are being displaced by electronic payments, but at a relatively slow pace. Their analysis finds a compound annual growth rate of just 2% for cash consumption. Between 2010 and 2019. So, that's bringing it down, like 1% a year, something like that.
Right.
So, assuming that global cash usage going forward grows by, say, 1% annually, total displacement won't reach 90% for several decades.
Sounds
Think
about
about that. Ponder that. That's really... I mean, to me, like sometimes, I don't know about you, James, but I hear people go like, "Oh, this is a dying profession. It's we've already picked all the low-hanging fruit, and there's nothing out there." Clearly, there's a lot out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
For several decades. So
yeah.
So anyway, now I want to just talk briefly about McKinsey because they just did a report on merchant acquiring, and they made a notation of something that you and I have talked a lot about with our guest here on the podcast about the future of acquiring is in value-added services, and that the revenue pool is, best for those ISOs, acquirers, agents that focus on value adds. Now, I said this is what I thought was interesting. Its research finds a growing willingness on the part of merchants to pay for commerce enablement services. Think loyalty programs, gift cards, affiliate marketing, and also for payments performance improvements like enhanced authorization, chargeback mitigation. I would venture, they didn't mention this, but I would venture even interchange optimization, right?
Yep.
And they also said that the trend is especially pronounced in verticals where digitalization is just now accelerating, like food and beverage, grocery, housewares, things like that the pandemic has sort of kicked in. And of course, marketing. We talked about this last week in our podcast, I believe, about marketing services, what a big deal that is, and how merchants are willing to pay a lot more for marketing than they are for payment processing.
Of course.
They said that, this is from the McKinsey report. Companies that negotiate hard over each basis point in transaction processing are prepared to pay several percentage points to affiliate marketing platforms and buy now, pay later providers, that position themselves as partners, right? To help close more sales, drive more traffic. A typical SMB spends less than 10% of its merchant services budget for payment acceptance. The remainder goes to a range of services from POS and business management software to loyalty and advertising, logistics, insurance, things like that. So here's the big reveal from that report. SMBs in the U.S. are expected to spend more than $100 billion on merchant services by 2025.
Wow.
And only probably about $10 billion of that is going to go to payments.
Right. Yeah. And so much of it will go to, there's a lot of ancillary services. You didn't even mention really as much like software and things like that. I mean, that obviously is a huge one as far as, the point of sale system, there's any type of SaaS, thing as well. So yeah, I think it's very interesting to see that direction. I do think it's interesting. I think some of these consulting, studies and projections, a lot of times they do kind of tend to, how shall I say, I think these prognosticators who don't have direct interactions with small business owners, a lot of times they become overly optimistic about the rate at which small business owners are willing to change.
Right. Of course, I agree.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think I think there's a lot of business. I think 10 years from now, there'll be a lot of businesses out there that are using a standalone terminal.
Oh, I agree.
It's not, is it going to be the same?
You're just not going to get them away.
Right. And is it going to be a significantly lower percentage than we have today? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And so things are moving in the other direction, but there's still a lot of going to be these individual standalone terminals. And so I think it's very interesting. And I think the trend, to me, the trend is kind of an inevitability. I think everybody agrees on the trend. I think the question is the timeline, right? If it wouldn't have been for cash discounting, which we just talked to Donnie about, Donnie right now, as the individual agent, Donnie would be all about software if it wasn't for cash discounting. But because of cash discounting, it's kind of pulling that focus from the agents that would have switched to being more focused on software. It's like, well, now this is a land grab opportunity. You got to go get all the cash discounting deals that you can, which makes total sense.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I actually think that the winners, moving forward are actually going to be, for the next 2 or 3 years, which is all anybody can reasonably predict anyway. I think the next 2 or 3 years, it's actually going to be more about those companies that are able to integrate the cash discounting into their overall technology offerings.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that are able to think about the way they're using their capital to buy more of these cash discounting accounts, whether that's through upfront bonuses to agents, whether that's through providing free equipment to merchants, whatever the case might be, that's where I think the big success is going to come. And so I think, yes, of course, I agree that, value-added services, SaaS solutions, all of that is the future. How long is it going to take? Well, business owners tend to move a lot slower than everybody wishes they moved when it comes to making changes. But obviously they are making changes now, and there's kind of that growing move.
The momentum is there. It's just how fast the caboose can push it. And
I agree.
I just think, for me, it always amazes me at how this market just continues to grow.
Yep. It really does. Well, Patty, great stuff as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of Greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.